was entering the Manosphere, a wild frontier of streamers whose behavior is reshaping the culture.
Louis Theroux is a documentarian who has covered many unorthodox and controversial people. In 2003, he covered neo-Nazis. In 2007, it was the Westboro Baptist Church. In 2015, it was Scientologists. And in 2026, he delved into the Manosphere with his documentary Inside the Manosphere. The Manosphere is bizarre. It's a reactionary community built by men of the far right and alt-right as a response to the paradigm shift in gender dynamics. For the Manosphere, feminism is the enemy and must be combated. This gender war, however, is less about trying to improve the world for men and more about selling snake oil.
I'm doing it for money. I don't care about
the morality of it.
I'm not living for other people, I'm living for myself.
Do you, young man, not feel like a man with all this empowerment of women surrounding you? Well, watch these videos and you'll feel powerful again. Does your body not resemble the ripped and rock-hard men that appear in movies? Well, give the Manosphere your money to get on a physical fitness routine where you're constantly shamed into working out. Are women not having sex with you? Well, give even more money, and these men who are all talk will give you the tips and tricks for picking up women. Except the tips don't work and the tricks are on you for thinking that they would work at all. Silly incel. Tricks are for grifters. The advice given by Manosphere influencers is ridiculous at best and harmful at its worst. It's ridiculous how Andrew Tate says that real men must only drink sparkling water and that men afraid of sparkling water cannot be trusted. But it is also harmful when people like Myron Gaines talks about loving Hitler because Nazis are so edgy that they're cool. Gaines also thinks that women deserve fewer rights, as stated in his book that's literally titled Why Women Deserve Less. Now, you might be thinking, who is dumb enough to buy into this nonsense? The answer is not just the loser men who believe it, but those who are desperate enough to cling to anything comforting. It's the same mentality for how TV ministers will prey on the elderly to send them all their money. It's a business model designed to capitalize on those who are easily manipulated. But while TV ministers functioned on a model that convinced people to open their wallets, the Manosphere also operated on attention and the concurrent ad revenue from those eyeballs. This obsession that young men attach to the Manosphere is intriguing for how prevalent it has become, and thus worthy of a Louis Theroux documentary. But compared to neo-Nazis and Scientologists, the Manosphere doesn't take much work to unravel the grift. Very little digging is required to unearth the hypocrisy at play. This can be as simple as watching a few clips posted by the Manosphere, or even simpler, just asking them directly. You see, neo-Nazis will close themselves off in their own collectives, and Scientologists will keep their secrets locked up as best as they can. But the Manosphere, that's a cult with a door left intentionally wide open. Everything is content to these people, and all that content is more revealing than even they might know. So there are a few key figures of the Manosphere that were interviewed for Louis' documentary, but three of them stick out the most. There's Harris Sullivan, aka HS Tiki Talkie. As his handle implies, Sullivan gained Manosphere fame on TikTok. His content is built on the trifecta of Manosphere scams. Fitness hype that reeks of insecurity, dating tips that reek of misogyny, and cryptocurrencies that reek of fraud. The next Manosphere influencer is Amru Falel, aka Myron Gaines of the Fresh and Fit podcast. His podcast mostly finds him inviting on women to insult for their inferiority, and men to spout their bigoted views on Jews. He's mostly known for his anti-Semitism and his misogyny that brings in the viewers, so you can probably imagine how bad his dating advice is. The podcast grew in popularity on YouTube, but it sounds like it's transitioning more to Rumble and Kick, you know, the platforms that allow very shitty people to keep expressing their shitty views. And finally, there's Nicholas Balanthazi, aka Sneeko. Now, compared to the other Manosphere influencers, Sneako is a one-man operation. He doesn't sell courses or have a fancy podcast studio. He's just, he just says right-wing bullshit about how men should be allowed to be sexist, racist, and transphobic. So Sneako mostly rides the coattails of other right-wing provocateurs like Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes. He doesn't agree with all of the right-wing, though. I mean, for example, he disagreed that the Nazis invented the concept of being transgender. That wasn't believable for Sneako. More believable for him was that it was invented by the Jews. Noticeably missing from this documentary is Andrew Tate, the most iconic dope of the Manosphere. Tate had been contacted to appear in the documentary, but declined, saying that Louis was irrelevant, which is debatable given that he's been making documentaries for well over 20 years and still doing so. And meanwhile, Andrew Tate has been running his Manosphere grift for a comparatively shorter time and continues to embarrass himself. Now, in all fairness, Louis is not as notable a name for the younger crowd who haven't watched many documentaries, but that blind spot might have worked to Louis' benefit in getting interviews with his subjects. Harrison only discovered Louis' documentary history through his chat, while Sneako agreed to speak with Louis after declining to speak with other journalists, likely recognizing Louis as more of an outsider to mainstream news outlets. And the three Manosphere subjects do seem to be more open with the documentarian about their misogynistic and hypocritical beliefs.
Do you consider yourself a misogynist?
I love women and I actually understand them.
You think you know better than they do?
They want a guy that can lead them and dominate them.
Okay, so this is a very frustrating film because while it does serve a purpose for the uninformed, it doesn't reveal anything new to anyone even mildly familiar with the online manosphere. This isn't a secret world with the curtain being pulled back. I mean, these manosphere dipshits broadcast everything. Harrison and Myron both stream their interviews live with Louis, with Harrison going so far as to stream before and during an interview in his own house. It's not exactly revelatory when anybody can stroll over to Rumble or Kick and observe the Manosphere Zoo. That said, Louis is a more ideal interviewer for not treating the Manosphere like he's David Attenborough observing wildlife. He does question these hucksters for their faults that deserve scrutiny. When Harrison brings up that men shouldn't watch pornography, Louis questions why this man would say such a thing when his business runs an OnlyFans operation. When Sneako speaks about his conspiracy theories regarding Satanists controlling the world, Louis doesn't just nod along Joe Rogan style, he actually questions the validity of such a claim. Another Manosphere figure interviewed in this film, Justin Waller, speaks about how men built all the skyscrapers surrounding them, only for Louis to ask the obvious follow-up question, "Are you sure about that? You really sure about that?" It really doesn't take much work for the Manosphere's influence to look absurd, and even though Louis has a gentle tone, he still bites. A noteworthy aspect of this documentary is how few women voice their opinions on this phenomenon. It's not for lack of trying, though. Louis does run into women who associate with these men and tries to interview them. During a visit to the Fresh and Fit podcast set, Louis meets Myron's girlfriend, Angie. She speaks a little bit about how she's in a kinda, sorta open relationship, but she doesn't really get much time to speak on this subject as Myron pushes her to go clean. She would not appear during any of the other interviews with Myron and would break up with him soon after. Louis tries to speak with another woman on Myron's staff who isn't his girlfriend, but this is quickly shot down as well. Once Myron witnesses Louis talking to this woman, he immediately texts her to shut down the conversation. Maybe the one woman who isn't entirely silenced during their interview is Harrison's mother, with whom he lives with. Louis asks how she feels about her son promoting such misogynistic rhetoric online, and she mildly brushes it off as not being that bad. Only for her son to chime in and basically say, no, it really is that bad. For nearly the entire documentary, any woman interviewed has to have another man either speaking over them or interrupting them. It would have been intriguing to hear what they really think when the Manosphere isn't in the same room with them. Louis never really conducts those interviews, and it's frustrating that this perspective is left unexplored. Because what Louis does delve into isn't all that new. We watch as Myron makes anti-Semitic and sexist remarks on his podcast that anybody can watch. We watch as Harrison made homophobic slurs towards people like Louis in videos that anybody can watch. Now, there is one section where Louis follows Harrison, targeting potential pedophiles in the street and then beating them up. Louis asks if this assault will be posted online, and Harrison says it won't. And for a brief moment, it feels like we're witnessing the cutting room floor. We're not. The video was posted in clips online soon after. So none of this is surprising. Even the comeuppance that follows is not all that shocking either, not just because we can all look this information up, but because we can see the pattern emerging. Myron claimed that his girlfriend, Angie, left him because she wanted to start a family, something that Myron clearly wasn't ready for. After all, he's still a young man in his prime at the age of 36. Angie would later explain in an interview that Louis' questions forced her to take a hard look at what she was doing with her life. As for the Fresh and Fit podcast, it was demonetized on YouTube, forcing the podcast to rely on other platforms for its revenue, like, Rumble and Kick. Sneeko continued to cling to relevancy and eventually got his YouTube channel reinstated, but only after a lengthy review period which he described as stressful. Although Sneeko said he would be more thoughtful about the types of videos that he would post, I'm not so sure he is. Since his return, he made a video where he sits down for drinks with self-avowed white nationalist Nick Fuentes to discuss America. So yeah, I don't know how long this channel will last, but even if he doesn't break any rules, his views are declining, so his influence is waning. As for Harrison, he got into a car crash while driving dangerously in England in 2024 and evaded authorities for a year before he was arrested. He pled guilty and was disqualified from driving for 2 years. He recently went on Piers Morgan, where all he did was call Piers a cuck and someone who hung out with Epstein. Harrison is a disgrace, even in the circles of those who would champion him. Inside the Manosphere has been deeply criticized for how little it explores beyond the basics. A key factor that goes woefully unexplored is how attention and money are the motivating factors in all of this. For example, Harrison was very open about the mechanics of what he does, and it's not because he cares about masculinity. Riches take precedence over any philosophy, as Harrison doesn't care if he's hosting an OnlyFans organization when it runs counter to his rules for men. Exploring this topic further, however, would mean delving into how capitalism has propped up this business model, but that just feels like a can of worms that Louis would rather not open. An easier goal, however, would be showing the damaging effects of those who follow the Manosphere figures. We don't see much of that in the film. We do see some young fans swarm these Manosphere figures at a few points, but they mostly just gush about social media and the hateful rhetoric that they live by. It would have helped the film if, it showed the damaging effects of the Manosphere lessons applied to gullible young men, but it's not in this film. The movie is basically the Manosphere for dummies, with a missing section on the causes and effects of the influences. It serves a purpose for the uninformed, but not much else. And what frustrated me most about this documentary is that it rarely addresses masculinity itself. We hear a lot about the faux masculinity being sold, but rarely does Louis delve into the topic of gender. I also just don't like how Louis challenges the toxic masculinity being promoted. At one point, Louis indulges Harrison by trying out a punching machine, and Harrison immediately mocks him as being gay for not punching harder than he does. In the epilogue, Louis showcases how he can hit harder on those machines, and no, Louis, you don't have to do this. You don't need to prove yourself to a homophobic asshole or his audience. You're already better than Harrison for not being a sexist pig, selling a hypocritical lifestyle, or fleeing the country after breaking traffic laws. All of this gawking and mocking of toxic masculinity can only go so far. And I'm not happy with that being where the discussion of what it means to be a man ends. So for the past year, I've been covering videos that discuss masculinity in movies, but not really. It's just the same crying about toxic masculinity and misreading what that term implies. And while these types of videos are easy to pick apart, there is something missing from this discussion. I've heard the grifter takes on the representation of men in movies, but what about an earnest discussion of masculinity in movies? And not the stoic, drivel interpretation built on regression, but a thoughtful examination of the many facets that compose men and how that gender is informed by and reflected in movies. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think I'm going to make some videos about masculinity in movies. Because while the short game would be to humiliate the manosphere into oblivion, the long game is going to involve finding better alternatives on the topic. And it's a topic that I've been thinking about for some time, and after watching Louis' sufficient yet lacking documentary, I think I'm ready to pull the trigger. So stay tuned to this channel for videos on masculinity in movies, approached not with insecurity, but with honesty and insight. Because there have been far too many videos indulging the manosphere. It's time to move on from these juvenile swindlers and wrestle the conversation away from boys to men. Because contrary to the album Cooley High Harmony, it's not that hard to say goodbye to yesterday.
Are you getting triggered? Do you think Satanists are running the world? Do you consider yourself a misogynist?
Absolutely.
I'm doing it for money.
Absolutely.
Do you think Satanists are running the world?
They want a guy that can lead them and dominate.
You think you know better than Satanists?
I love
Satanists.
actually understand them.
Do you consider yourself a misogynist?
What have I done?